So I've just come from Rashna Singh's office, and she gave us an official proclamation to declare October 7th to October 14th Dyslexia Awareness Week in the province of BC. So this is huge, huge, the whole province. So thank you all for coming and listening. Usually I actually do not write speeches because I don't read very well. I'm dyslexic. But being so anxious to see all of your beautiful faces, I was up at 3 a.m. I decided to write. So I'm going to read for you. It should go okay because I wrote it, right? So, thank you all for being here today at the BC Legislature for this significant event, Say Dyslexia at the BC Legislature. It's a privilege for me to stand before you and share my perspective as a founding member of Dyslexia BC, a grassroots parent group dedicated to advocating for change in our province. I have walked this path for 2 decades as a parent, raising 2 dyslexic children. I understand the struggles, the challenges, and the hopes that come with being a parent of children with dyslexia. And I've also witnessed the incredible potential and resilience that dyslexic individuals possess. Our gathering today reminds me of a powerful quote by Mark Twain, who once said, "Action speaks louder than words, but not nearly as often." As parents, we know this truth all too well. We've seen how actions, real change, can make a world of difference in the lives of our children. But we also recognize that sometimes inaction speaks louder than both words and actions. It's when our children's needs go unaddressed, when they face barriers to their education, that we hear the deafening silence of inaction. And it's the silence we are determined to break. In 2019, an arbitration decision in BC left us questioning where dyslexia and other learning disabilities stood in our education system. The absence of dyslexia expert during those proceedings raised alarm bells. It emphasized the urgent need for an unbiased source of information and expertise in matters related to dyslexia in each district. We cannot allow the silence to continue. Dyslexia is not an isolated issue. It's a significant part of the learning disability spectrum, accounting for 80% of all learning disabilities. However, it's disheartening that many people in BC, including those in education, are not aware of this fact. We need to change this. We need a learning disability expert in each school district in BC to ensure that every student, including those with a learning disability like dyslexia, receives the support they need to succeed. Furthermore, we want access to free and unbiased diagnosis for dyslexia separate from the school district's budget. I'm pretty sure we are the only disability assessment that isn't covered within our medical system. Our children's access to a fair and equitable education should not be hindered by budget constraints. We also want to make it clear that universal design for learning is not a remedy for dyslexia. Our children deserve targeted support and strategies tailored to their unique needs. Our mission is straightforward. We want to ensure that students with dyslexia receive equitable access to education in their own public schools. Our ultimate goal is to see policy and legislation in place that guarantees screening for dyslexia starting in kindergarten, to identify and support students right from the beginning of their educational journey, access to structured literacy in all classrooms, special education classrooms, and mainstream classrooms. Every child deserves the opportunity to learn effectively. Teacher training on dyslexia and structured literacy, empowering educators with the knowledge and the tools to support dyslexic students. Access to early diagnosis to provide timely interventions and support. Within the arbitration decision, I found information that the government doesn't really support diagnosis until grade 4, which is too late to provide effective remediation. access to remediation during school hours in their own school districts so that our students can receive the help they need without disruptions to their education, access to assessments and resources for dyslexic adults as well, ensuring they have the support they need throughout their lives. Our vision is united. We want our children to have equitable access to education, community, and employment. By taking action today, we can create a brighter future for individuals with dyslexia in British Columbia. Thank you for standing with us in this important cause. Together we can make a difference, and together we can ensure that every child with dyslexia has the opportunity to thrive. Thank you. So, I can't memorize a speech. You got my reading. Anyways, our first speaker, almost all of us are either dyslexic or we have dyslexic children who are going to be speaking today. And our first speaker, David, is a entrepreneur, very successful entrepreneur that, what else do you want me to say? That's good enough? Okay, he's going to come and talk to you guys.
Thank you, everyone. I don't work off notes. I just have a few points I want to make because I've got such a short amount of time and I want to get a bunch of stuff out. It's not necessarily politically correct, but it's the truth because I am the result of an education system. I do not blame teachers, but it's a system that is ingrained and it's egregious how it deals with children. I just heard Kathy say that they don't want testing till grade 5. 400 BC, I believe it was, Plato said, show me the boy till 7 and I will show you the man. That is the truth. We need to deal with this. I think for dyslexia, I don't know what the word is because I don't pay attention to it, but for analysis, it is a 3 to 5 year wait, and that can't happen, so parents are going out spending their own money, $3,000+ to do it. The school systems do not have the proper infrastructure to support those children in the education system, and it's falling apart when it comes to learning disabilities. Now, I know this is harsh, but it's the truth. A year and a half ago, I went down to California to be part of a documentary called The Truth About Reading. It's online, you can look it up, and you can look me up with a lot of that. In 11 hours, I was taught to read at 62, tested by the government, came out the other side with comprehension 10 times greater than it was 11 hours prior, and that has stuck with me. This is the science of reading. We need to address it. We cannot be the original systems that were developed in the 1800s. They've got to change. And now, as you're all dealing with GPT chat and AI, that is my specialty, helping people understand the future. I will tell you this, you will not even recognize this planet in 2.5 years. The entire education system is going to change, many of our jobs are going to change, and I'm here to help people through that. But at the same time, if we don't give our children a fighting chance now to be part of that, we're destroying them. The interesting thing about AI right now, it took a giant leap forward. That's why it came onto the scene in November of last year. They found a new way to program it called deep learning. And deep learning looks at language. So all AI is now based on language. What it does, it predicts the next word. There are more than 200,000 words in the English language, 800,000 in total. And in real time, it can predict science, math, anything. Here's the interesting part. For us, as humans, we only have to learn 44 sounds in the English language. That's it. Every word is covered by those 44 sounds. The science of reading methodologies have shown when a child is taught the sounds rather than guessing the words on an MRI, which does a brain scan, it moves the firing of the neurons to the part of the brain that are consistent with somebody who can read. And somebody who can read actually reads better. So I'm dumbfounded, and I find it absolutely egregious that there are bills and budgets in place to put out $100 million to private institutions to help them train, and they still charge parents $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to attend, and if they don't follow the rules, they're out. That money could be put in to looking at the children at a young age, educating teachers so that they understand the science of reading. It is not difficult, and we will see a complete change in our future. The only reason I am here, I had a strong mother who put me through it. I'm an anomaly. But when you look at the children who've grown up to be adults that have made it through learning to read or successful, 50 to 60% of the top entrepreneurs in the world are dyslexic. But at the same time, 80% of the juvenile delinquents and those incarcerated are dyslexic. There is a point where self-esteem and loss of self-value and self-worth occur. When the teasing and bullying start, I lived through it all. So I'm here to tell you that this is an absolute priority. Look at the money that is going into the private sector. Keep the children in the flow of the education system for their own well-being and their own psychology so that they can grow. And the studies do show that it works. That's it for me.
Thank you, David. I don't think it was as loud for him because he was taller, so I guess we can angle it.
You can tell them if anyone wants insight or knowledge, they can get me through you.
Okay, so anybody wants insight or knowledge through from David, you can get it through me.
I will make myself available to anyone who wants to come forward and find out the truth about reading.
Yeah. He's just finished a movie with a group. What's the movie called?
Truth About Reading.
The Truth About Reading. It's just been released last week or 2 weeks ago. So yeah, maybe we'll get it as an event here in the next few months in BC. So our next speaker, I think we had someone cancel, but Steve's here. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Steve Trush, and he has 40 years, 50 years, I don't want to put year, 45 years of experience. He started as a school teacher. I'll let him explain. Thank you, Steve. He's here from Calgary.
Yay, Calgary. So the first thing I'm going to just say, though, is I think we all we all owe Kathy a big round of applause. A fantastic amount of work here. So I'm really pleased that she asked me to come and speak. I'm very honored. This is such a beautiful setting in a beautiful city, a bunch of beautiful people. I am very familiar with dyslexia, although I would not say I'm dyslexic myself, so I haven't lived the life that some of you have. Dave, you pretty much took my speech away from me. Thanks a lot.
Sorry.
But I know what you're talking about because I'm part of the group that trains you, you might say. So I guess I'm going to just shorten the speech that I did write out because I want to be careful with some of the words that I'm going to say here. First of all, I was going to recommend that the BC Legislature pass legislation to screen children at an early age in kindergarten. That's already in the works, as it turns out. So they read my mind, took that away from me. So the second thing, though, is that I think that parents themselves face a tremendous financial burden considering things the way they are right now systemically. And so parents need to get some sort of support when their child is dyslexic, just the way that they do now with a Q designation for autism. So that any little bit helps. But the tremendous costs involved, and I'm aware of them because I was in the system and I started a clinic, a private clinic, that charges outrageous fees to help kids who are dyslexic. The thing is, our program works. That's the big difference. It works. And you're not tied into it, and we're not going to boot you out if you break any of our rules because we don't have any rules. So I think besides the money thing, the questions we have to ask ourselves is, and my final thought on this thing is that we don't want to jump on a new bandwagon. So there's not a single science of reading. That makes it sound like there's only one way. There isn't. But we do know a great deal about reading because of the research is ubiquitous. It's unbelievable. So what we now know are the processes, the invisible processes that are needed for a child to become a good reader. And we have certain ways to bring that about quicker for them than is what is traditionally taught through traditional phonics, we'll say, if phonics is taught at all. Because the big thing we have to get away from first is the remnants of whole language. And so what we still have in the system is a primary strategy of teaching children to guess at words. So that's all wrong. So like Dave was just saying, what children need to know is and have an awareness of, and that stems from the teacher having this awareness in the first place, of the 44 phonemes in the English language. Now we all know the English language is the one that is most challenging around the world. So children in Italy, for example, where the orthography, the spelling is very consistent, one sound, one letter, that's it, learn to read by the end of grade 1. Some of them still can't. Those are the dyslexic, but it's only some. So if we have a system for English that's a little more structured, a little more organized, then we will get more promising results than we get now. It won't wipe out all the problems, but we'll get more promising results. So I think let's not jump on the bandwagon. There's 3 important questions to ask, I think, at this point, once the legislation is passed, which I'm pretty sure it will be. First of all, what needs to be taught? When does it need to be taught? And how should it be taught? Those are the 3 questions that educators will face from now on. And scientific research gives us partial answers to each of those questions, but some careful reflection is needed from more than one perspective. So, for example, there are many structured literacy programs. They're all going to be structured literacy now because that's the new term. So publishers get on bandwagons. They don't create anything new, they just follow the leaders. So structured literacy, research-based, those are just terms now being thrown out for anything. So each structured literacy program or principle that might be considered for classroom or remedial implementation has to be accompanied by research showing growth in reading scores for recipient students that outdoes traditional methods. I have my own opinion as to which approaches are likely to be more effective. Dave, fortunately, has touched on them and shown and given us his own example of how quickly a change can be implemented. So scientific research on reading, like I said, it's ubiquitous, and the teaching components need to be given to teachers so they have at least a practical idea of how to work with students and how to identify students who are in need in the school systems now. So using that evidence, I think we need to ensure as much as humanly possible the best outcomes for all students. What Dave has said about everything changing in the next 2.5 years, that's pretty exciting and a little bit scary too, yeah? But there's much in the classroom that's already very good, and in our zeal for quick reform, let's remember to keep what's already there. That's good. You know, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, as we typically do when these new waves come into place. So, I had an ethical dilemma when I started the clinic in the first place because I knew it was going to be an expensive proposition for parents. So the choice was to go back in the system and just be comfortable as a school psychologist and get all those holidays and good pay, or else, you know, become a crazy businessman, which I had no experience of doing, and just trying to help kids. And so I took that route, and as expensive as it is for you parents, I'm still glad I did it. So thank you very much.
Was that better?
Yeah. Yep. All right. So I want to introduce our next speaker, and his name is Finn Lust, and he was actually our first volunteer, if you can believe it. And he is homegrown Saanich, right?
Nanaimo.
Nanaimo? I didn't
Nanaimo.
realize that. Okay, so Nanaimo. He's an island boy. Here we
Yes.
go. Here, it's all yours.
Okay, so I'm here today to talk to you about my experience with dyslexia, and here's a story about how it went for me. I had a lot of problems in grade 1 where teachers and people didn't think I was smart because I couldn't read or write. And I felt shamed by the teachers because they wouldn't help me. They would say that you can't do that, you shouldn't do that, why aren't you able to do this? Luckily, my parents decided to get me tested for dyslexia and put me in a special structured literacy program so I could learn to read and write better. I'm now in grade 7, and I still go to the program twice per week. And it costs a ton. It's way overpriced, and we need to work on helping people who can't pay for it. Now I'm meeting many kids who struggle with dyslexia, or at least I think so. They can't read or write, and I don't understand why they can't get help with their reading or writing because their parents can't afford it. Why can't they get help? Reading and writing is important to our lives, as it can save lives, like reading signs on the road or reading ingredients for people with allergies. A fun fact is, did you know in a class of 25 kids, 5 of them will have dyslexia? I find it very upsetting that people can't learn to read and write just because they learn in a different way. And even though they learn in a different way, in many ways they might actually be smarter than the average learner. I have learned through spending time with other people with dyslexia that they think very outside of the box. They can think in different ways and solve a lot of different problems. A fun fact is, many big companies want people with dyslexia for their thinking. In BC, we need to provide more resources and funding to individuals with dyslexia for assessments, access to structured literacy, and ongoing support so they can have better access for education, community, and employment. Thank you for being here today to learn about dyslexia.
Thank you, Finn. Our next speaker is also a high school student, right? And her name is Tierney, and I can't pronounce your last name, I'm sorry. Come and say something.
My name is Tierney Vandervlugt. I'm 14 years old and a grade 9 student. I'm going to share with you one of the worst days of my educational career. I was in grade 3 and my sense of self was about to be torn apart. After a spelling test, I was asked by an SEA how I spelled the word spell on my page. I had no idea and my page was blank. She pushed me to spell the word out loud. I completely butchered it, spelling it wrong. She then asked me if I was dumb because I couldn't even spell a simple word at 8 years old. After being embarrassed by an SEA, I returned to class, handing my classroom teacher a blank spelling test. She responded by telling me I needed to work harder and stop being lazy. I was so angry at myself for not being able to be a better student, overwhelmed by a gut-wrenching feeling, like I was going to scream and cry at the same time. Later that day, I was pulled into a room by a resource teacher. She asked me to spell every word I could without making a mistake. I wrote about 10. She asked if I was joking and told me to use my head. I went back to class and sat at my desk. My chest was heavy, like I couldn't catch my breath. I knew I needed to leave. I hurried to the washroom and sat on the cold floor. I felt scared and alone. I began to sob, shake, and gasp for air, struggling to recover. I didn't understand what was happening. I believed I was a bad student and I was ashamed. Everything that happened that day was my fault. If I had access to early screening, structured literacy, and a funded category, this day and many others that I've experienced since wouldn't have happened. I did not receive the support I deserved. I did not deserve to be illiterate. Thank you.
That was amazing, Tierney. Awesome. So we have a mother-daughter duo. They're both from Langley, by the way. And this is Jessica, Tierney's mother.
All right, my name is Jessica Mosley. I am the mother of 2 dyslexic children, Tierney being one of them. Dyslexia BC is asking for a few things. Among them is early screening, a funded category, and access to structured literacy for students in British Columbia. So I'm going to discuss today the price that we paid for these items not being in place for Tierney. Because early screening was not available, my daughter suffered considerable emotional trauma, which led to compulsive and self-destructive behaviors, anxiety, panic attacks, depression, and low self-esteem. But more than that, her entire concept of self was damaged. Had her teachers been aware of her learning disabilities, I suspect that the detrimental language directed towards her in the classroom, applying blame to her for her challenges, may not have occurred. By the age of 8, my daughter understood she was different and believed herself to be less than her peers. Those words, used by frustrated and unsupported teachers, became part of her private speech. When she could not read something, despite her best efforts, her internal voice reiterated those words to her. Stupid, lazy. Why don't you just read it? It isn't hard. She continues to fight this internal monologue daily. Because my daughter does not have a funded category, she is put in situations where her IEP is not followed and her accommodations are treated as negotiable. She must advocate for herself to her teachers and is often perceived as rude or indignant for insisting that she has the right to equal access to education. These exchanges cause her substantial anxiety. Our family has paid upwards of $100,000 supporting her education for expenses associated with her testing, remediation, lost wages, and any necessary assistive technology. I have endured gaslighting by educators, administrators, and resource teams, but I suppose it is logical to blame the parents when a diagnosis will lead to an additional child who needs support and zero funds to help them. Because my daughter did not have access to structured literacy, her right to an education was not met. Her psych ed report showed that she was illiterate at the end of grade 3, barely reading at a kindergarten level. She was only offered balanced literacy remediation via the school system, which ultimately taught her how to guess the words instead of decoding them, further masking her stealth dyslexia. She left the public school system for almost 2 years and was registered as homeschooled. She missed out on 2 years of building relationships with friends and learning to navigate the social hierarchy. I provided explicit instruction via structured literacy, and she received additional outside remediation at a cost of $850 per month. Tierney worked relentlessly and finally learned how to read, but we will never fully close the gap because remediation began too late. She is now well supported by her resource team, but this does not negate all of the trauma and struggle that she has experienced. Tierney's story is not the exception. It is the reality for as much as 20% of the population who is dyslexic. For our children to thrive, they need early screening, a funded category, and structured literacy. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jessica. I'm going to introduce Kate Arnold next. She's a post-secondary student, and she's actually designed my new logo. Yeah, you've got, it's on the big sign down there. So she has a story to tell you as well.
Do you mind if I put this down a little bit? I'm shorter than the average person.
No problem.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome, thank you. So first off, I want to thank everyone for coming out today. It's so amazing to be surrounded by so many people who are so supportive, and I've made so many different friends here. It's just made me so pumped to be here. So thank you for coming out. I really appreciate it. So I have dyslexia, and I was diagnosed in grade 12. So I actually grew up believing I was stupid. It was the default that my brain went to because I was like, I have no explanation for why school is so hard for me. So both elementary school and high school were a big struggle being undiagnosed. Some peers bullied me, and teachers were really frustrated with my work. And I know many other people experience these same sort of things with dyslexia in school. No one deserves to believe they're stupid from 5 years old till 17 or way longer. No parent or teacher deserves to be constantly struggling and unable to help their child with their homework. No one deserves to be ignored by a special ed teacher telling them, "You're fine," when I spent 2 weeks nonstop on an essay and I managed to get a C-. So these things are all things that I experience. My teachers and parents experience them as well. And I am also one of the few lucky ones that my parents were actually able to afford the $3,000 diagnosis, because without that, I wouldn't have gone to university. And I wouldn't have been able to make these logos for people, which is like my passion in life. And so, man, I've been thinking about how to end this speech all day, and I really just want future generations to be able to thrive. I want to see dyslexic kids thrive and do the best they can in school and enjoy learning. It is so important to me to see that because I know what I went through was hard, and I want the future generations to be able to excel as best they can. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Kate. So our next speaker is TJ, and I know I've gone out of order, but it's because I didn't write it down on a piece of paper and I can't remember. So TJ, you are up next. TJ's from North Vancouver.
Thank you, Kathy. Sure. It's probably better if you do it.
Sorry.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Kathy. As a parent and an advocate for students with disabilities, I talk with BC parents every day who have students with learning disabilities like dyslexia. These families must often seek out special tutors and often specialized schools because they are not learning to read in the public classrooms. Families are suffering financially and rely on external means to support their struggling students. The federal government approves those with learning disabilities like dyslexia for the disability tax credit, but the public school system does not receive funding for these students and are therefore unable to support their needs to learn. Students with dyslexia, like you have seen, they are very smart. They're extremely hardworking, and they have brilliant talents. And learning to read and write is severely holding them back. It is their right to receive the support they require to be successful in their learning environments. And it is only right that they receive these supports early. Given the tools to succeed, their potential is incredible. Thank you.
So I've saved the best for last. No, I'm joking. He likes to be referred to as that Rick Moore, right? Right? No, not at all. Rick is my hero. Rick is really, truly my hero. He has it's a landmark human rights case in Canada that's has not only helped dyslexic families, but all kinds of disabilities for kids to get help in schools. He originally started a systemic complaint against the province, but he only won against the North Vancouver district. And his case was 11 years ago. So, and his son is now thriving and doing his dream job. But I'll let him tell you exactly what's gone on since his case. Thanks, Rick.
Firstly, I'd just like to say, sorry, these inspiring stories have choked me up. In 1997, my son was in Kenneth Gordon, a private school specializing in teaching dyslexic kids. And he was there because the school psychologist broke all the rules and told us, with the closure of the diagnostic center in North Vancouver, that if there was any way we could afford to put him in Kenneth Gordon, that was his only chance. Well, many promises had been made to us in the public system, but it really amounted to wait and see, and maybe he'll be mature enough someday to learn to read. He developed childhood migraines because of the stress of being in the public school system and watching as all his friends learned this magic thing of reading, and he felt stupid, as all kids that don't have that magic skill do. And because he had this, a neurologist said to the school, if you deal with the learning difficulties, that will likely solve the migraines. So he went from completely off the waiting list for a psych ed to the top of the list. So why is it that a child has to be suffering and damaged to even get on the list? Then he got an assessment which showed he was first percentile, severely dyslexic, and he was promised a place at the diagnostic center. The diagnostic center was shut down because of funding cutbacks, and the school district thought that was the program that should be shut down instead of shutting down other programs that they might have, or at least even looking into the alternatives to shutting down the program. And that's when the school psychologist did this unbelievable thing and said, you should put him in Kenneth Gordon. Well, nothing had worked, and so it was another shot in the dark, but we remortgaged our house and put him in the private school. But something happened within months of him being there. You know, you tell your children when they're in the public school and they can't read that they're very smart. But of course they don't believe you, because they take a look around at all their peers, seeing them able to do this magic thing, and they can't. He gets to the private school and he sees that actually there are kids just like him who are cool and smart. And we saw within months his self-esteem being rebuilt. And more than his being in a place that knew how to teach him to read, the most important thing, of course, was seeing that self-esteem be rebuilt. So at the end of, he had to wait a year. So the closure of the diagnostic center was in grade 2, couldn't get into the public school, so they essentially babysat him for grade 3. And in grade 4, he makes this amazing recovery of his self-esteem and is well on his way to learning to read. And when he started grade 5, I got really angry, thinking, I'm a bus driver, my wife's a secretary, we've had to remortgage our house. There must be thousands of kids who couldn't do what we managed to do. What about them? And I started phoning around. I called the ombudsman. Oh, yeah, it's not really our remit. But one phone call led to another and led me to community legal assistance. And one of the greatest lawyers in the country, one of the #1 experts in disability law, Francis Kelly, and community legal assistance. Because, of course, you can't take on the government on your own. You have to find somebody pro bono who's going to... And we actually broke the bank of class. They won't take on a case like that ever again, because it just about bankrupted them. But what Francis was able to do was get us all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. But first, it took 2 years to get to the Human Rights Tribunal, because first the commission turned us down because we hadn't appealed to the district, the very people that had cut the program, of course. Then we got to... There was a commission at that time, by the way, and I know there is one again now, but one of the things that happened while we were presenting our case was they got rid of the commission, which was supposed to handle the systemic side of the complaint. And when they got rid of the commission, we were left to do all of that, the individual complaint and the systemic complaint. It took 5 years to present the case. Of course, we were criticized because for turning our human rights complaint into a royal commission on education. I guess we actually did. And at the end of the 5 years, the Human Rights Tribunal ruled entirely in our favor. Individual complaint and systemic complaint. And I was in heaven. I thought we had the potential to save the lives of the very next generation of dyslexic kids. We eventually got to this. So anyway, of course, that was appealed. We lost the BC Supreme Court. We got a dissenting opinion at the BC Court of Appeal that enabled us to get to the Supreme Court of Canada. I really hadn't intended to tell this whole story, but anyway. hard to get me off my soapbox. And what happened was the Supreme Court of Canada is not immune from the controversy of imposing its will on the legislature. And one thing I learned is courts always do the minimum to put things right. So in the decision, they kept the individual win and said that parents in the future can use the precedent to get services for their children, just like we were able to get for Jeff. Well, we didn't get services for Jeff, but we did get all the tuition we paid to the private school back, and he got damages. But of course, that's impossible. And it hasn't been possible for families to use the precedent. So these kids that are several generations later, who are brave enough to come up here and tell their story, it's still only it's worse, actually, than it was in our day, because the road we use have been turned into dead ends. So you go to the Human Rights Commission, you'll be forced into mediation. You couldn't do a systemic complaint. And not only that, I hate to say it, but the province now feels even more immune, and districts feel immune, because if some parent does manage to go and get maybe the tuition paid to a private school, and it does happen, that's just the cost of doing business. They pay more every year to their lawyers than they do to help one kid. So that's my story, and I feel so emotional hearing these stories, because it shouldn't be. My son's now going to be 37. His dream job, by the way, he's a fireman. He's City of North End fireman. So you give people the right resources, their potential's unlimited. I want to say one other thing. One of the things that drove me from the beginning was the fact our kids are totally invisible. There is nothing. You look at these dyslexic kids. They're just beautiful young children. There's nothing that jumps out at you and says, this child is dyslexic, is disabled. So it's easy for them to disappear into the classroom. As a matter of fact, they strive to become invisible in the classroom because they live in terror of being exposed as unable to read. So to bring it to today, this is not the first time that the ministry has promised to do early screening. I pray that this time it's not a false mirage for the families of dyslexic kids, because we just guess at the numbers in the system. And yet we've always had the ability to know exactly how many dyslexic kids there are. If you screen them and identify them in kindergarten or grade 1, what happens? If you are an ethical governing body, you will track. You will now have identified that child, and you will have an obligation to track them. And we will no longer guess. Here's an interesting fact. We know from academic studies that about 1 in 5, or 20% of the school kids entering the school system, are at risk for reading failure. The dropout rate forever has been about 20%. It should be a pretty simple thing to guess there might be a correlation there. And yet we're content to, and they know from anecdotes from parents that there are kids falling through the cracks in the thousands every year. And we're content to let that happen in the public school system. And the reason I know this, Jeff has an older cousin, 9 years older. We hadn't learned how to advocate for that child. She dropped out in grade 10. All the bad things happened to her. It's amazing she's alive. So for every success story, there are countless kids that fell through the cracks that are self-meditating at Maine and Hastings. We're costing this province millions and millions and millions of dollars simply because we don't teach a child how to read when that science of reading is right there. It's available. It's not hard to find. It's not going to revolution. It's no different teaching a teacher how to do the learn how to teach reading than it is to teach biology or PE or something. You just make it part of the university curriculum. Imagine a public school system that actually teaches and knows how to teach kids to read. Thank you so much, and sorry for going on and on and on.
Well, that is the end of all our speakers, but I have one more announcement to make. I've done 3 surveys in the past 5 years, and I've been collecting a lot of data, and I've got results from about 1,000 different people, and I've been producing a report the last couple weeks. So my new press release today is that report will come out in the next week or so and arrive at the ministry for them to take a perusal. And I'd like some feedback. I think the recommendation by the Select Standing Committee, I guess you were there, Susie, to have dyslexia screening in kindergarten with funding, I think it's phenomenal. And the biggest reason we're here is to hopefully let the government know that we really, really want this to happen. So thank you so much for coming and listening and being supportive. And we'll see you soon.